Alright, so today we'll be looking at the topic of, does Islam allow Muslim men to have sex slaves, and are they allowed to rape captive women? Firstly, we'll take a look at one of the top Muslim scholars of today's time, Shabir Ali, and we will see how he responds when he is asked, does a Muslim man have to get a female slave's consent before having sex with her, or due to her being owned as a slave, does she have no consent rights? Okay, so let's watch the video. The link will be in the description if you want to watch the whole thing.
And does consent play into this at all, or can we understand anything about consent from this end? Like, does a female slave have to consent to that, or is it kind of like because she's owned and so therefore?
In the classical thought, the understanding is that by virtue of the fact that she's owned, she does not have the right to consent. Or to withhold herself from her master. The master has the full right over her, and her consent does not play anything in this relationship. But by contrast, if you allow me for a moment, we should understand that in the ancient world, women did not have many rights. And even marriage was not, as we might expect it today, like a relationship of equality between spouses. So in the Quran itself, a woman is, her husband is referred to as her Baal, which literally means her Lord. And the idea that she would have consent in the marriage itself, this is stated in so many different ways in the Quran, but classical Muslim interpreters of the Quran, some of them said that the woman's main responsibility in a marriage is to fulfill the sexual needs of her husband. And for that reason, the husband has the right and the claim to this, and she cannot refuse. So some of them even speak of the possibility that the man could force himself onto his wife, and she cannot refuse, because that is his right. Of course, this is not ideal, and none of them would say that this is an ideal situation. And they would expect the woman to be cooperative, and regardless of what she's doing, whether she's busy cooking or whatever, when her husband calls her for that particular act, she should be ready and willing to engage. So the woman in marriage itself did not have so much right as we might expect of women today, and we would argue for today, even within the Islamic context. So when women did not have this full right, then it's not a far cry from the position of slavery, or we can say rather that the distance that we see between the free woman and the slave woman is somewhat minimized.
Yeah.
Somewhat minimized. I may add to this that the word for a divorce in the Quran is talaq, and talaq literally means release. So it is as if the woman was in a situation here in which she might be released. And what is often quoted as the last sermon of the Prophet, peace be upon him, may not be authentic, but nevertheless these words are collected on placards and sometimes put up in Muslim homes as the last sermon of the Prophet. Most often they're found in mosques. And in that sermon, the Prophet, peace be upon him, urges men to take care of their women and be aware that God is overlooking them while they have this power over their women. The women are with them like slaves. That's the terminology that is being used. Of course, they're not slaves. They're free women, and they're married. They're wives. But when we understand this broader context, we can see how the interpreters thought of female slaves as having a secondary status, even below this, and that their consent did not matter in this relationship. They were fully owned, and the master had the right to all of the woman.
So as we can see here, Shabir Ali says, because she is owned, the master has full rights over her, and therefore her consent does not matter. Okay, so now that we've seen Shabir Ali has stated that the master has full rights over the slaves, and it doesn't matter if she doesn't consent to having sex, he can still force himself upon her. But now let's take a look what the Quran says about owning slaves and if you're allowed to have sex with them. Quran chapter 23 verses 5 to 6. And they who guard their private parts, except from their wives or those their right hands possess, for indeed they will not be blamed. So you can see from this verse, you're allowed to have sex with your wives and those who your right hand possesses. But what is the meaning of right hands possess? Well, let's go back to Shabir Ali and get his answer on it.
What is the reference? What does right hand possession mean? Because I know you mentioned that earlier as well.
Well, this is taken to be a way of speaking about ownership, ownership of slaves. So.
Okay, so we see right hands possess means ownership of a slave. So from Quran chapter 23 verses 5 to 6, we can see that you're allowed to have sex with your wives and those whom your right hands possess, being your slaves. But just to make sure I'm not misunderstanding the verse, let's go to what one of the scholars says about the verse. We'll go to the tafsir of the Jalals. So it says, except from their spouses, that is, to their spouses, and what slaves their right hands possess, that is, concubines, for then they are not blameworthy in having sexual intercourse with them. So we can see here, Quran chapter 23 verses 5 to 6 is allowing Muslim men to have sex with their female slaves. Now let's go to Quran chapter 70 verses 30, where it states again that Muslim men can have sex with their female slaves. It says, except from their wives or those their right hands possess, for indeed they are not to be blamed. Now let's get a quick look at the tafsir of Ibn Kathir on this verse to make sure I'm not misrepresenting it. He says, and those who guard their private part, chastity, meaning they keep their private parts away from that which is forbidden, and they prevent their private parts from being put into other than what Allah has allowed them to be in. This is why Allah says, except from their wives or their right hand possession, meaning from their female slaves. So we see here from Ibn Kathir's tafsir, he's saying that men are allowed to have sex with their wives and their slaves. We see the Quran says the same thing in chapter 33 verses 50, where it says, O Prophet, indeed we have made lawful to you your wives, to whom you have given their due compensation, and those your right hands possess, from what Allah has returned to you of the captives. So we see here Allah is saying that Muhammad is allowed to have sex with his wives and those who his right hands possess, being his captives. Now we'll take a look at the Jalal's tafsir on Quran chapter 33 verses 50 to see what they say the verse means. And it says, O Prophet, indeed we have made lawful for you your wives, whom you have given their dowries, and what your right hand owns, of those whom God has given you as spoils of war, from the disbelievers, whom you have taken captives, such as Safiya and Juriya. So we see here from this Quran verse and the tafsir that you're allowed to have sex with your captives. And the last verse we'll take a look at that allows Muslim men to rape their captive women is Quran chapter 4 verses 24. It says, and also prohibited to you are all married women except those whom your right hands possess. So we see here in this verse, Quran chapter 4 verses 24, you're allowed to rape your captive women. Now we also have a hadith that gives us the historical context of what was happening at the time, so let's take a look at it. Sunan Abu Dawud 2155. Chapter heading, regarding intercourse with captives. Abu Sa'id al-Khudri said the Apostle of Allah sent a military expedition to Awats on the occasion of the Battle of Hunay. They met their enemy and fought with them. They defeated them and took them captives. Some of the companions of the Apostle of Allah were reluctant to have relations with the female captives because of their pagan husbands. So Allah the Exalted sent down the Quran verse, and all married women are forbidden unto you save those captives whom your right hands possess. This is to say that they are lawful for them when they complete their waiting period. So we can see from this hadith that Muhammad goes on a military expedition and fights his enemies. After fighting his enemy, he takes some of them as captives. Then we have some of the companions of Muhammad who want to have sex with their female captives but were reluctant to have sex with them because their pagan husbands were still alive. Due to Muhammad's companions being reluctant to have sex with their female captives because their pagan husbands were still alive, Allah sends down the Quran verse allowing them to have sex with them even though their husbands were still alive. Now this is most definitely rape and fornication because they're having sex with their female captives while their husbands are still alive. So we see from this hadith that Allah and Muhammad are allowing for the companions of Muhammad to go and rape their female captives even though their husbands were still alive. Now we'll take a look at Ibn Abbas, Muhammad's cousin, and see what he thinks Quran chapter 4 verses 24 is about. He goes and says, and all married women are forbidden unto you save those captives whom your right hands possess of captives, even if they have husbands in the abode of war, after ascertaining that they are not pregnant by waiting for the lapse of one period of menstruation. So we see here Ibn Abbas's exegesis on the verse agrees with the hadith that I showed on the screen. So we can now conclude that Quran chapter 4 verses 24 is about being able to rape your captive women even though their husbands are still alive. Okay, so now that we've seen that the Quran gives permission for Muslim men to rape their captive women. We will now look at some of the hadith where we see the depravity of Muhammad's companions, and we'll see how Muhammad responded to his companions wanting to rape the female captives that they have. Sahih al-Bukhari 4350. The Prophet sent Ali to Khalid to bring the khamis of the booty, and I hated Ali. And Ali had taken a bath after a sexual act with a slave girl from the khamis. I said to Khalid, "Don't you see this, i.e. Ali?" When we reached the Prophet, I mentioned that to him. He said, "O Buraida, do you hate Ali?" I said, "Yes." He said, "Do you hate him? For he deserves more than that from the khamis." So for those of you who don't know, the khamis is actually 1/5 of the war booty that they would get after defeating someone in battle. So we see from this hadith, Ali is sent to Khalid to get the war booty and bring it back to the Prophet. Ali takes his time bringing the war booty back to his people because he's doing a sexual act with one of the female captives that they got from a battle. So the girl Ali's having sex with from the war booty would have just had maybe her family slaughtered, and then we have Ali going and having sex with her, which is most definitely rape, because no one's gonna go and say, "Hey, you just destroyed my tribe, you destroyed my people, let me go and have sex with you." No, that does not happen. So Ali has just raped one of the slave girls from the war booty, and now he takes a bath. Then we have Buraida, who's upset with Ali for having sex with the slave girl and claiming her as his own property. Then eventually Ali and Buraida come back to the Prophet with the war booty, and Buraida mentions what happened. And instead of Muhammad saying, "How could you rape a slave girl? This is not allowed in Islam," instead he goes and says, "Do you hate him? For he deserves more of the war booty. He deserves more slaves, more gold." So we can see here from this hadith, Muhammad is following the Quran and so is his companions by raping their slaves because it's what their right hands possess. Now we'll take a look at some hadith where Muhammad's companions treated women like absolute garbage and pieces of meat that they could just sell. Sahih al-Bukhari 2229. Narrated Abu Sayyid al-Khudri that while he was sitting with Allah's Messenger, he said, "O Allah's Messenger, we get female captives as our share of the booty, and we are interested in their prices. What is your opinion about coitus interruptus?" The Prophet said, "Do you really do that? It is better for you not to do it. No soul that which Allah has destined to exist, but will surely come into existence." So we see from this hadith that Muhammad's companions would get female captives from the war booty. But the companions of Muhammad ran into a little problem. They wanted to have sex and rape the women, but they wanted to sell the women after they were done with them. So they came up with the solution of pulling out. So they wanted to rape the girl and pull out before they ejaculated so that the woman wouldn't get pregnant, and then they could sell them for higher prices because they wouldn't be pregnant. This is clearly the companions using the woman just for their sexual pleasure and gratification, and then they would just sell them after. And when they wanted Muhammad's opinion about pulling out, we have Muhammad saying that it is better not to pull out. And this is due to Allah having destined what is going to exist, and it will surely come into existence no matter what. So we can see this hadith is very in line with the Quran, as it allows for you to rape your female captives as you own them, you have full possession over them, and once you're done with them, you can sell them after. Now we'll take a look at some hadith where the companions of Muhammad would go to battles and they would get captives from the war that were female, and Muhammad's companions were so horny they wanted to rape their female captives because they are away from their wives. So then they thought of the great idea of doing coitus interruptus, which is pulling out. And then they decide to go to Muhammad to ask what his opinion on pulling out is. So the first hadith we'll look at where this situation arises is Sahih al-Bukhari 4138. I entered the mosque and saw Abu Sayyid al-Khudri and sat beside him and asked him about al-alzi, i.e. coitus interruptus. Abu Sayyid said, "We went out with Allah's Messenger for the Ghazwa of Banu al-Mustalik, and we received captives from among the Arab captives, and we desired women, and our celibacy became hard on us, and we loved to do coitus interruptus. So when we intended to do coitus interruptus, we said, how can we do coitus interruptus before asking Allah's Messenger, who is present among us? We asked him about it, and he said, it is better for you not to do so. For if any soul till the day of resurrection is predestined to exist, it will exist." So we can see from this very authentic hadith from Sahih al-Bukhari that Muhammad's companions would go out and battle people, and then they would receive captives from them, and some of them would be women. Now because Muhammad's companions were away from their wives and on the battlefield, they would have these female captives and they desired to have sex with them. They really couldn't control their lust when they were away from their wives, and it says that they love to do coitus interruptus. So then Muhammad's companions intended to go and rape the female captives that they had on hand and to do coitus interruptus with them. But before they went ahead and did this, they decided to ask what Muhammad thought about coitus interruptus. And Muhammad's response is, it is better for you not to do it because any soul that is predestined to exist will exist. We see the same story being told in Sunan Abu Dawud 2172 and Sahih Muslim 1438a. So now let's take a look at some of the hadith where the focus is on the companions of Muhammad wanting to pull out of their female slaves while having intercourse with them. Sunan Abu Dawud 2170. Abu Sa'id reported that the people mentioned about withdrawing the penis before the Prophet. He said, "Why one of you does so?" He did not say, "One of you should not do so. Every soul that is to be born, Allah will create it." So we see here from this hadith, Muhammad's companions were wanting to withdraw their penis, pull out while having sex with their female slaves. And when they went to Muhammad for his opinion on the matter, he says, "Why does one of you do this?" The reason Muhammad said, "Why are you doing this?" is because in his perspective, he says every soul that is to be born, Allah will create it. It doesn't matter whether you pull out or not. So Muhammad is allowing his companions to treat women like absolute filthy rags, just however they want, and keep pulling out. It doesn't matter because whatever's going to be born, Allah will create it. We see this again in Sahih al-Bukhari 5210. In this hadith, the companions of Muhammad are getting female captives from the war booty, and when they're raping them, they're pulling out so that they don't get them pregnant, and then they can sell them after. And then they go to Muhammad to see what he has to say about them pulling out. And he goes and says, "Do you really do that? Do you really do that? Do you really do that?" And then he goes on to say, "There is no soul that is destined to exist, but will come into existence till the day of resurrection." This meaning that you don't really need to pull out of these women because it doesn't matter what you do, Allah has ordained what will happen. So we see here from this hadith just how horribly the Muslim men would treat their female captives. Now when we look at Sahih al-Bukhari 5207, we see that it says, "We used to practice coitus interruptus during the lifetime of the Messenger." And then we go to Sahih al-Bukhari 5208, 5209, we see again it says, "We used to practice coitus interruptus while the Quran was being revealed." Shabir added, "We used to practice coitus interruptus during the lifetime of Allah's Messenger while the Quran was being revealed." So we can see that the companions of Muhammad were raping women and pulling out while having intercourse with them while the Quran was being revealed and while Muhammad was alive. Now we'll take a look at some hadith where the pull-out method went wrong for some of Muhammad's companions. Sunan Abu Dawud 2171. A man said, "Messenger of Allah, I have a slave girl and I withdraw the penis from her while having intercourse, and I dislike that she becomes pregnant. I intended by intercourse what the men intended by it. The Jews say that withdrawing the penis LZ is bearing the living girls on a small scale. He, the Prophet, said, the Jews told a lie. If Allah intends to create it, you cannot turn it away." So we see from this hadith, one of the companions of Muhammad has a slave girl and he keeps having sex with her and pulling out, hoping that she doesn't get pregnant. But in this case, she ended up getting pregnant. So we can see here that Muhammad's companions were treating their slave girls like absolute pieces of meat, wanting to have sex with them and then pulling out so that they wouldn't get pregnant. We see the same situation happen in Sahih Muslim 1439b and Sunan Abu Dawud 2173. Now we'll take a look at what the companions of Muhammad did when they ended up getting their slave girls pregnant. Sunan Ibn Majah, Hadith 2517. We used to sell the slave women and the mothers of our children when the Prophet was still living among us, and we didn't see anything wrong with that. So now when we put two and two together, we see that Muhammad's companions would have these slave girls and want to have sex with them, so they would have sex with them and pull out. They pulled out hoping that the woman wouldn't get pregnant. And when they went to Muhammad for advice on pulling out of their slave girls, Muhammad would respond by saying, "If Allah intends to create it, you cannot turn it away." So the companions of Muhammad would be in a position where they were able to pull out, or if they wanted, they could just ejaculate within the girls, due to Muhammad telling them it doesn't really matter what you do, what Allah has predestined will happen. So then because of this, some of the slave girls ended up getting pregnant. And that's when this hadith comes in, where you see the companions of Muhammad would end up selling their slave women and the mothers of their children. And in their mind, they saw nothing wrong with it. So in conclusion, we see the Quran and the tafsir explanations allow for Muslim men to own slaves and for the Muslim men to have sex with their female slaves with or without their consent. We also see in the hadith that Muhammad allowed for his men to rape captive women from war even while their husbands were still alive. Muhammad's companions would also rape their female slaves and pull out before ejaculating so that they could sell them after they were done using them. We also see Muhammad giving advice to his companions about pulling out, telling them what Allah has predestined to exist will come into existence. And lastly, we saw some hadith where the pull-out method didn't work, and some of the female slaves of Muslim men would get pregnant. Then the Muslim men would sell the mothers of their own children, and the Muslim men saw nothing wrong with doing that. Well, that's it for today, guys. You can feel free to download this video, upload it to your monetized channels, use it however you want. Thanks for watching, I'll see you guys in the next one.